Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're in This Freedom Whence by John Wesley Brady, page 43 in the chapter Slave Trading and Bubble Finance. His new subhead is Actual Slavery on English Soil. As early as the first quarter of the 18th century, the slave traffic was leaving a marked impression on English life. Numerous planters, having made fortunes out of the institution, then described as the great pillar of the British plantation trade in North America, returned to England, bought large estates, and brought over Negro slaves as their servants. But more, being covetous of social and political power, they soon entered the market as bidders for pocket and rotten borough seats in Parliament, with the result that finally the price of marketable constituencies rose from around £1,000 to even £5,000. Meanwhile, however, a new and highly paradoxical problem confronted them, and only temporarily could their political and financial power solve it in their favor.
Slaves being human, they were not long on English soil till they sensed the normal Englishman's passion for liberty, and having but tasted of that exhilarating cup, desertions ensued. These too were encouraged by the rumor spread among them that if only they could be baptized, they would be legally free. And sympathetic clergymen would generally be found who secretly would perform that office. So great, therefore, became the problem of absconding slaves that in 1729 retired planters petitioned both the Attorney General and the Solicitor General of the day for an opinion upon the legal status of slaves on English soil. The judgment was, quote, that no slave coming into the British Isles from the West Indies became free, and that baptism had no power whatever to absolve them of their condition, end of quote. This judgment so emboldened the English slave owners that they began publicly to advertise for runaway slaves, offering handsome rewards for their apprehension, and threatening with the law of England any who sheltered them. The result was that slavery on English soil substantially increased, as also did the schemes of the slave owners, crimps and touts, who always were on the trail for easy gain.
Indeed, in 1765 we find Blackstone, who was the great legal expert of the day, though striving simultaneously to ride the horses of liberty and slavery, pronouncing in his commentaries the owner's property right to the life labors of his Negro slaves in England. And now it is laid down, said Blackstone, that a slave or Negro, the instant he lands in England, becomes a free man. That is, the law will protect him in the enjoyment of his person and his property. Yet with respect to any right the master may have lawfully acquired to the perpetual service of John or Thomas, this will remain exactly in the same state of subjection for life, which every apprentice submits to for a space of 7 years, and sometimes for a longer term. And whatever service the heathen Negro owed of right to his American master, the same, whatever it is, he's bound to render when brought to England and made a Christian. End of Blackstone's quote. Blackstone, moreover, explicitly told Granville Sharp, who was one of the great abolitionists of the period, when fighting for the liberty of the maltreated slave, Jonathan Strong, that the legal rights of the slave owner over his human property existed in England. So stood the legal interpretation until in 1772, Lord Chief Justice Mansfield, in the famous Somerset case, having failed to effect a compromise, reluctantly ruled that, quote, slavery is not tenable in England, end of quote, and that, quote, as soon as any slave sets foot upon English soil, he becomes free, end of quote. This verdict, supported in 1778 by a large majority of the Lords of Session, stopped peremptorily the bringing of slaves to England. But meanwhile, on Lord Mansfield's own admission, there were already between 14,000 and 15,000 slaves in the country, and open slave sales had actually taken place in England. The Liverpool Advertiser of September 12, 1766, for instance, carries this notice, quote, "To be sold at the Exchange Coffee House in Water Street this day, the 12th instant September, at 1 o'clock precisely, 11 Negroes imported by the Angola," end of quote. Hence, contrary to popular belief, modern slavery was not unknown on English soil. Next time, Brady goes into kidnapping and bound labor and transportation of the kidnapped and slaves. We'll put a link into Martin Hengel's book, which we did a video on property rights in ancient Israel, property and wealth in ancient Israel, and also to two takes on slavery.